Hi, good morning.
Hi.
I'm Marin, and one of the things my group talked about was this issue of one laptop per child. It's been around for a while, I think close to 10 years now. And I personally have some skepticism regarding its direct concrete impacts on poverty reduction, but we were hoping to hear your thoughts on the issue as well.
Sure. One laptop per child, I would say, is one of the most extreme cases where a person and an organization believe that technology by itself will fundamentally change a very challenging social problem. So first, what they are trying to address is education. And especially early on, although gradually they have adapted their rhetoric, but especially early on, Nicholas Negroponte, who founded that project, basically would claim that the developing world has problems with absentee teachers as well as undertrained teachers, and that particularly for absentee teachers, we can fundamentally change education by simply handing a cool laptop to every child who currently doesn't have a good teacher. The way I think about that is, imagine, I realize most of you are probably too young to have children, but if you have nephews or nieces, think about, would you ever think of a good education as being handing your nephew or niece a laptop and then leaving them with it for 12 years as they grow up? No school, no teacher, they just get the laptop, right? And do you think that would be a good education? Okay, I see some people shaking their head. So probably not, right? And why is that? Why don't you believe that would be a good education?
Because there are so many other social issues surrounding the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like level of education, So yeah, and just being exposed to technology. So yeah.
Right. There's lots of other social issues. What are some of those social issues? Like why, imagine, again, think about somebody who is, I don't know, 8 years old, okay? And you give them a laptop to play with. No other supervision. What would they do with it? Play games. Here's why. I think a lot of people play games.
Sorry, maybe.
Anything else?
We heard dismantle it. What else?
Dismantle it, okay.
Play games.
Play games. Good. So, and why is that? Is it because children fundamentally don't want to learn?
No.
No. What's the challenge there?
Basically, it's not like they don't want to learn, but the fact is, learning is to do with the interaction that is very much that needs a conducive environment, and environment will
right. So they're seeking interaction. They need a conducive environment for interaction. But what about interactive games? Why wouldn't they be good?
I mean, the issue is even when they have, like, I know a lot of them have English language games set up on the computer, but you give a 4-year-old an educational game and a fun game, and they can still tell the difference. So
yes,
just haven't got to a point where you can convince kids that they're not learning.
Kids know when they're trying to be taught a lesson, and they don't really like it. They like to do the fun things, right? Now, a lot of times the fun thing is healthy, but it still requires adult supervision to keep guiding them in the direction of productive learning, right? And it's not anything that has to be heavy-handed. It doesn't mean that you have to stand there with a ruler and rap them on the hand every time they start playing a game. It's that they need to be encouraged to do the things that are productive and educational over the things that are immediately pleasurable by themselves. So I think of it a little bit like, I think of another analogy I think about in education is athletics and treadmills. So imagine if you had a bad football team, and you were wondering whether to get the entire football team treadmills so that they can train at home, or a better coach. What would you get?
Coach.
And why is that? For the most part, it's again the people that make a difference in these situations. So in the same way you want a good teacher in the room rather than a lot of technology, one of the arguments for OLPC is that they'll say, well, it's too difficult to get good teachers in the classroom, so we'll give them the next best thing, which is a PC. And I think there's just so many flaws with that thinking. The next best thing isn't a PC. A lot of times it might be a teacher who might be more of a, maybe somebody who is a local high school student who really takes an interest in teaching, doesn't have qualifications to teach, but is really excited about it. That might be better as an older, sibling figure than somebody who is unable to teach well because they haven't been trained well. So there's lots of different alternatives. People have tried different things in education. And then on top of all of that, OLPC is actually quite expensive compared to what many developing countries spend on children's education. I think in fact that barrier was probably the primary reason why many countries refused to sign up for the 1 million unit purchase that they were asked to make. So I know in India, people just thought it was ridiculous that the government would pay even $100 per student when the total budget that they often apply to students in education is on the order of $100 or $200 per year, and most of that goes to teachers. So they were certainly not about to take all of that and then move it towards a technology that they didn't completely trust. So yeah, it's an interesting project. It happens to be very convenient for me because it's the most convenient counterexample that a lot of people don't believe in. But there are, there's a gradation of different projects like that where the people who talk about the technology really get excited about the technology, often at the expense of everything else. Now, having said all of that, I would say that there are environments where OLPC can be used positively, but those are exactly the places where the teachers are very good, the schools are well administered, there's a reasonable amount of budget so that they don't have to worry about spending $100 per child. But unfortunately, those are often environments that are not the typical case where you are worried about education in a very poor environment.
Cool, thank you.
Very nice question, thank you.
You got a question? Yeah, Bubudu, you want to come close to the microphone if you don't mind.
Oh, hi. Hi, I'm very tall. Thanks for taking this time to speak to us. My name is Mawunda. One of our discussions that we have been having here was the issue of, and now that you have raised it yourself, the trade-offs between basic goods and technology, especially since most of the technology that has the potential to fight poverty can only be accessed at the household level and not necessarily from government funding, like mobiles, personal computers or laptops. And anecdotal evidence points to the fact that poor households, especially those that could be highly impacted by technology to improve their livelihoods, have to sacrifice some sort of income or a level of income that they could spend on basic goods to access or to buy technology. And that inevitably affects their livelihoods or their basic conditions on the ground. Now, from your understanding of the impact of technology on poverty reduction, on the improvement of communities and households, especially at the household level, how can those type of trade-offs be addressed? And is there any place where this type of anecdotal evidence that we see from South Africa, at least, is emerging around the world? Thanks.
Thank you. Interesting question. And I think what you were asking was, given that it seems to be the case that some households will displace consumption that they would have made on other goods for mobile phones, is there some way to address that challenge, especially if those goods that they are neglecting to purchase have to do with things like nutrition or education. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so actually one of your instructors, Kathleen, is actually very well versed in this particular topic, so you should ask her about it if you haven't already. That's an interesting question, and I think the question is actually bigger than the question of technology. It's really a question of what is the role of policy and government in development. I have to say, in this particular case, I'm not personally yet sure, but one thing I do think is that, you know, in none of what I recommend do I think that people should be prevented from buying things like mobile phones, especially if they can afford them and if they are already out there in the market. You know, I think that choice should be up to each person. You know, if somebody chooses to buy a phone instead of paying for, I don't know, new clothes, that's a decision that really should be up to them. I don't think it's particularly a good idea to have outside forces like the government basically preventing that from happening. But then the question is, on the other hand, do we need to have people who are supposedly working on behalf of poor populations, do we need to have them also rallying behind technologies like mobile phones that are already, in and of themselves, already making it to very poor populations? So right now, one of the more interesting trends is that everybody seems to think that phones are so important that we should not only allow companies to set up mobile phone towers in very remote areas, but we should make it easier for them to do so, and that we should push them to do so. And that's something that I think is less clear. It's not at all clear that unless we really know that the net impact of a mobile phone is positive for people who are often very undereducated, that we need to encourage existing corporate tendencies using public funding. So one of the things I think is less understood about mobile phones is just the extent. We all believe that they're very positive. They certainly have made things convenient for us, but there are lots and lots of situations where people use them for things that are either not productive or not particularly even good for themselves. One thing most of you have probably heard about M-Pesa, which is a mobile payment system in Kenya that is getting a lot of attention. People think that M-Pesa is a net positive because it allows people to save, it allows people to send money back home more conveniently, and all of that is true. But I often worry about what it means when you have a two-way pipe into the wallets of very poor people who don't have the same kind of critical thinking skills that all of you have. And then at the other end are sitting all of the world's most powerful companies with their very well-funded marketing departments. So you can imagine what happens when that pipe is created and basically open the way it is now. It wouldn't be a surprise to me if we find over the years that people end up spending more on goods that they don't necessarily need. So it's the same with mobile phones. So the question is, if the question is, what should we do about that trade-off? I don't think it's up to us to necessarily change the purchasing decisions of individuals, but the best way to deal with that problem is for us to place even more emphasis on education, which is usually the most critical thing in helping people to make informed choices rather than choices that are the easiest.